support, protect, and defend. I'm John Kadlic, the Reno City Attorney, and this is Reno Periscope, a look around the city of Reno. And in today's show, what we're going to do is cover three different subject areas. We're going to talk about the alcohol compliance efforts of the Reno Police Department and the Reno City Attorney's Office as far as sales of alcohol to minors by both stores and by bars. And we're going to talk about the party car, which is an effort by the Reno Police Department to handle parties that get out of control. And finally, we're going to talk about what it's like in downtown Reno on a typical weekend night as far as alcohol disturbances are concerned and the calls for services to Reno Police Department. And my guests today on the show are Sergeant Ernesto Leyva of the Reno Police Department. He is a sergeant with the SET team, and he'll explain to you what that is. And Deputy City Attorney Matthew Jensen, and he is responsible for handling the administrative hearings for those businesses that sell alcohol to minors, whether it be a convenience store or a bar. And we'll talk a little bit about what happens with those. Could you explain to the audience what the SET team is?
The SET team is a regional unit that's comprised of three departments: the Sparks Police Department, the Reno Police Department, and the University of Nevada Reno Police Services. It's comprised of approximately 11 detectives, 2 sergeants, and a lieutenant. And basically, we have 4 primary duties that we do. We work vice operations, which include the prostitutions or illegal prostitution in the Reno area. We do drug investigations, and we do alcohol compliance checks.
And can you explain a little bit about alcohol enforcement, since I think the public is very concerned about that?
We're checking to make sure that businesses, stores are in compliance and trying to prevent the sales of alcohol to underage minors, to enforce, make sure they're in compliance, and doing what they need to do to make sure that these sales aren't occurring to minors.
And explain to the audience how you do that. What's the procedure in order to set up an alcohol sting?
Normally, the procedure or the operation for the SET team when we go out and conduct these compliance checks is that we will seek volunteer minors, usually between the ages of 18 and 20 years old. They will come. There'll be an agreement or an understanding between what the volunteer minor can and can't do while they're inside the prospective business, whether it's a store, a casino, a restaurant, a gaming establishment, whatever it is. And then what we will do is we will assign a couple of detectives with the volunteer, and we will give them a list of, let's say we're doing stores that week. We'll give the detectives and the volunteer minor a list of stores, and they will go out and they will attempt to purchase alcohol from these stores.
And as far as the clerk who sells, he gets a citation? That's a criminal citation?
Yes, it's a misdemeanor citation, and usually issued in the misdemeanor court of Reno.
And as far as the store itself, what happens in that case?
Well, once the store has been, or the clerk's been cited, then what we do is we'll take a copy of the citation. We have a form that we fill out, and we forward that to our special investigations group, which in turn forwards that information to the city attorney's office to see if there's any other ramifications possibly that could occur to that store.
And so, well, then we'll turn to Mr. Jensen. So once you get that information from the police department, what does the Reno City Attorney's Office do? And you in particular, since you're the one who does these matters, could you explain to the audience what happens then?
Well, the information is actually first sent to the Business Licensing Division, and there is a meeting between those two departments, and the City Attorney's Office is copied on that information. After they meet, the information and their recommendations and questions are discussed with the City Attorney's Office, and a date is set for a hearing if one is needed, and the matter is brought before an independent hearing officer for decision.
And explain what happens at that hearing.
At the hearing, the city presents its case, presents the facts that are the basis for the action. The order to show cause hearing is a hearing for the licensee or the alcohol salesperson to show cause why their license should not be suspended or revoked. The city presents its case to the hearing officer, and the licensee is then allowed to present its case, perhaps present some mitigating evidence to show how this incident occurred and how it will not occur again. Each side will argue for an appropriate penalty, and the hearing officer will make his decision on that.
And once the matter has been concluded and the administrative hearing officer issues a decision finding that the store has not complied and is sold liquor to a minor, what happens to the store as a general rule?
If there is a suspension, the average suspension is approximately 3 to 5 days. The suspension is of the alcohol sales. Other functions of the store can continue, but alcohol may not be sold during that time.
And once that information, the hearing officer has suspended the license of a licensee for a period of time, let's say three days, what do you do then? Do you communicate that to the police department, or how do they know that the store isn't allowed to sell?
That information is communicated to the police department and the business licensing division. I inform the store owners that the information has been so communicated, and they may be visited by somebody attempting to purchase alcohol as a check to see that they are not selling any alcohol.
And Sergeant Leyva, then do you go back knowing that the store has been suspended from the sale of alcohol? Do you go back and check on that periodically, do spot checks?
We will do periodic spot checks, time allowing. Of course, we have other duties that kind of consume our time at times, but every now and then when we receive these notifications, we will do a spot check, especially the ones that have received the suspension. We will try to get back in there and see if they're complying with the suspension.
And why don't we talk a little bit about that thing called the party car? Can you explain to the viewers what the party car is?
The party car is basically an assignment given to two patrol officers. They're in uniform, they're in a police car, and basically it's assigned during the periods of, during the weekend when we have a high peak of calls for services related to parties. Juveniles, you know, having loud ruckus party going on, and alcohol obviously is being served. It's basically the same concept that we have with the alcohol enforcement, trying to reduce and prevent the consumption of alcohol by minors. So in essence, what the party car's function is when they're assigned that is to handle all the party calls, and they go out and they will address the party accordingly depending on the situation.
So what happens, let's say the Reno Police Department has received the call, there's a wild party up near let's say the university, or it could be anywhere in the city, but let's say up by the university. What happens then as far as the party car is concerned?
Well, their function is primarily first to get on scene and assess the situation. If it's a loud, out of control party, then obviously they will get additional resources there to address the party.
So does it become a time when you find that there are some pretty more or less intoxicated young people and that you do have to administer medical attention?
Absolutely. There are several times where you get on scene and you just find these subjects or these minors or these adults grossly intoxicated to the point where they're unable to care for themselves, and usually when they're at a party, nobody else wants to care for them.
Is there ever a time when they might be taken into civil protective custody if you believe they can't care for themselves?
Absolutely.
And explain to the viewers what civil protective custody is and what happens in that particular instance.
Civil protective custody is basically being drunk in public. No crime has been committed, however, the subject is unable to care for himself due to the fact that he or she is extremely intoxicated. So at that point, as long as no medical needs or attention is required, then what we do is we basically take that person into custody, and we eventually transport that person up to the Washoe County Jail, and he or she is held there until they have time to sober up, and then they're released.
And I've seen the Reno Police Patrol wagon that is used for transport. It has a little sign in it, doesn't it? As I recall, what does that sign say?
It says, "Thank you for choosing the Reno Police Department for your transporting needs today."
And as far as that, I'm going to turn to Mr. Jensen. We have what's called a social host ordinance. Could you explain to the public what that is? That is it's been in existence, what, maybe a couple of years now? I know you drafted it. Could you explain to them and the importance of that particular ordinance?
When the police do have to visit these parties, when they do get out of control, they do compile reports that are sent to our code enforcement team. And the information in there that's compiled is sent to the resident of the house as well as the property owner, so that the property owner can take responsibility for what occurs on his or her property.
And so what happens, let's say there is a wild party at some, you know, and in this case probably a rental. What happens then after you get the notice? What do you do? What happens to the owner as far as the party is concerned?
Well, these wild parties oftentimes have crimes happening there, whether minors in possession of alcohol or fights that break out or ruckuses on the street. Those crimes do constitute a nuisance. That goes to our code enforcement team again, and they address these nuisances on property. The code enforcement team will send notice to the property owner to declare that a nuisance is occurring on their property, and property owners have an obligation to clean up their properties, and we hope that they do so through this method.
And let's say that the first time the owner does nothing, what happens then? And there's another party.
If the owner does nothing, he can receive administrative fines. If there is another party that occurs there, he will get repeated notice and he can receive further administrative fines. There can be further action taken by the city if this continues to put added pressure on the property owner to please take matters into their hands.
And have you found that you've had success, and the Reno Police Department's had success in giving the notices and code enforcement as well to the owners trying to clean up some of these parties?
I think there's been great success. It really doesn't proceed to those more extreme measures, and there is communication, a dialogue between property owners and the city in correcting these situations.
Well, let's talk about one other thing. I know we're going to run some tape of, tell us what a typical weekend is like, particularly in the late night hours in downtown Reno for the Reno Police Department. I mean, I realize these are times when the Reno Police Department is down in manpower along with a lot of other agencies. So could you explain what, let's say, a typical late Friday night, say from maybe 11 on into the morning, what it's like for the Reno Police Department?
And being specific to the alcohol-related issues at hand.
You see all that shit?
Typically about 11 o'clock on the downtown area, the downtown corridor, it gets very busy. We see an increase in calls for service, which is usually related to alcohol consumption, whether it be fights, disputes, arguments. We generally start to see a rise in calls for service there. And typically, if we start to see a lot of those calls, for instance on our screen, we can definitely say, hey, it's alcohol related, such as the party calls, then a supervisor can assign a couple of guys to the party call, or the party car, which actually helps dealing with some of these issues that come up. However, keeping with the downtown corridor and all the clubs that are down there, usually about 2 o'clock, once the alcohol starts kicking in, that's when we really start seeing the rise in call.
And of course, when that's happening, that's taking officers away from other duties, just trying to basically keep the downtown safe for the other people who are there.
You're tying up a good portion of the patrol division just dealing with these fights, these issues that occur down there.
I want to thank Sergeant Ernesto Leyva of the Reno Police Department, the SET team, and Deputy City Attorney Matt Jensen for appearing on this show. And these are tight budgetary times, so they are down. There has been attrition in the Reno Police Department, and sometimes they may not be able to get to your call as quickly as they would like, but they care and they're going to try to get there as fast as they can. They care about the citizens of this community. They work hard for the citizens. Being a police officer can be a very dangerous job. I hope that when you see your police officers that you will commend them for the hard work they do on your behalf. They are here to protect and serve this community, and they really do care about it. Thank you, and I hope that you've got some good information from watching this show.